Good evening. Tonight we have the privilege to interview two remarkable human beings, both of whom are survivors of genocide. Both have been awarded the British Empire Medal for their role in telling the stories and ensuring that the truth will out. Janine Weber is a survivor of the Holocaust that took the lives of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, as well as other victims. Sokvel Din is a survivor of the Khmer Rouge killing fields during the brutal Cambodian Civil War that raged for 3 years from 1975 to 1979 and claimed the lives of 2 million people. Welcome, Janine and Sokvel, and thank you for participating in this Holocaust Memorial Day event.
Thank you very much.
With your permission, I'm going to read a summary of each of your stories so that we'll have time in the 1 hour that we have to explore some of the themes that emerge. And we'll start with your story, Janine. Janine Weber was born in 1932 in Lvov, Poland. In 1939, Lvov was occupied by the Soviet army. However, following the invasion of the USSR in June 1941, Lvov came under the authority of the Nazis, and under German rule, the persecution of the Jews started immediately, and Janine and her family had to move out of their home. They moved into a house on the outskirts of the city, shared with 3 other families. Janine's family were only permitted to bring 1 suitcase and had to share 1 small room in the house. Jewish civilians in this area were also subject to frequent German raids on the houses. In an attempt to stay safe, Janine's family decided to dig a hiding place underneath a wardrobe in their small room. But this hiding place was only big enough for Janine, her mother, and her brother. And when the day came that their house was raided by the German authorities, Janine's mother took her children into the hiding place. During the raid, Janine's father, who was not able to fit into the hiding place, was shot, and her grandmother was taken away, and she never saw her again. Shortly after this, the family were forced to move into the ghetto. The living conditions were appalling. And soon after arrival, her mother contracted typhus and died. She was 29 years old. More members of Janine's family began to contract the endemic diseases that were rife in the ghetto and died as well. Other members of the family were sent to Belzec extermination camp, where they were murdered on arrival. As things became more desperate for her family, Janine's uncle managed to find a farmer that was willing to hide Janine and her aunt, Roger. But this situation soon took a turn for the worse when the farmer hiding them began to harass her aunt. And Roger was able to escape, but Janine was kept locked away. Eventually, the farmer released Janine, and she was sent to another farming family, this time with her brother Tunio. However, a few months after Janine and Tunio arrived, the family's daughter brought an SS man to the farm, and Tunio was shot, and Janine narrowly escaped with her life. Janine then managed to hide her Jewish identity from a Polish family, and she worked for them as a shepherdess. It was not long before the family discovered that Janine was Jewish, and they gave her a train ticket to go back to Lvov. Before she was separated from her aunt, Janine was given the name and address of a caretaker who worked in a convent in Lvov. The man's name was Edek. Edek hid Janine in the attic of the building where she was reunited with her aunt and uncle, who were also hiding with 12 other Jews. The group were moved to an underground bunker, and they stayed there for a year. The bunker was horribly cramped, and Janine's aunt and uncle managed to obtain false papers for her. And under a new identity, Janine went to live in a convent in Krakow, and from there to live with a priest. And eventually, Janine managed to work as a maid for an elderly couple in Krakow, and this is where she stayed until the city was liberated in early 1945. And Janine was once again reunited with her aunt, who had also survived 6 months after liberation. Janine Weber has been a long-term friend and supporter of the National Holocaust Center and Museum. She continues to tell her story to this day, detailing the horrors she endured in her childhood, and her testimony plays an essential role in the education of the Holocaust to school children and adults, and continues to provide a poignant truth about her story of loss and survival. And now Sokvel. Sokvel Din was forced out of his home in Cambodia's capital Phnom Penh by Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge on April the 17th, 1975, during the Cambodian Civil War when he was just 17 years old. His ordeal began with a terrifying experience when he opened the door to two soldiers wearing all black, one of whom pointed a gun at him and threatened to shoot his family if they did not leave home immediately and get out of the city. I remember it clearly. I will never forget that image of this horrible face. I was thinking, this isn't true. His father, 6-year-old brother, and dozens of other family members were among the victims of the communist regime, which for over 4 years was responsible for an estimated 2.2 million deaths through execution or disease in labor camps. Sockville left with his family and they traveled with crowds without any water, eventually taken to a labor camp. He endured hard labor in fields and rice paddies, working 7 days a week under the hot sun, given a food allowance of just 3 spoonfuls of rice per day. The agricultural areas became known as the killing fields, with people working themselves to death, beaten or killed if they disobeyed. Sockville said, most people they executed by hitting them on the head and knocking them into a ditch. When I talked about it, I used to cry, but now I feel strong. I must be strong. It's not my story. It's my life experience. It's indescribable, and I can't believe that this could happen to me and to my family. He was eventually taken from his family to work in another labor camp, hearing the news of his 6-year-old brother's death 2 days after leaving. He was captured by the Vietnamese army after it invaded Cambodia on Christmas Day in 1978, overpowering the Khmer Rouge, and he was held in a brick oven with other prisoners. Recalling the terrifying moment, he said, I thought they were going to burn us alive in here. However, he was moved to a prison in Siem Reap, where he was held for months, interrogated and tortured. His mother made the journey to Siem Reap on foot with Sockville's younger brother and sister, and they were reunited when he negotiated his release. The family escaped to Thailand, making the dangerous journey with the threat of being recaptured at any moment. They made it to a refugee camp where they lived for many years, and eventually they contacted a cousin in Basingstoke who sponsored them through the Red Cross, and they arrived in the town where Sockville continues to live to this day on August the 4th, 1987. He said he made a list of all his family members who died, which took up an entire A4 sheet of paper. Building a new life himself, Sockville is now a freelance translator, and he works part-time in Sainsbury's in Kemshot. 2 years ago, he was awarded the British Empire Medal, the BEM, as of course was Janine. Sockville has written an account of his eventual journey in the UK in a book titled, and I can strongly recommend reading it, The Killing Fields of Cambodia, Living. You've just brought me back in too early because I can't remember the rest of the title. Thank you. Just give me the slide again, please. Surviving a Living Hell. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's the story, of course, in brief. And Janine and Sockville, both of you have lived through and experienced terrible historical events that are officially designated genocides. But they were very different in their scale and, more importantly, in their purpose. The Jewish genocide was a carefully planned and brutally executed attempt to eliminate the Jewish race. The Cambodian genocide was not primarily directed against race, although there was a racial prejudice by the Khmer Rouge against fair-skinned Vietnamese, but it was against a class of people. So Sockville, can you briefly give us an explanation of what motivated Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge to so shockingly treat people like you and your family when they gained an upper hand in the Cambodian Civil War?
Hello, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, everyone. Thank you for being here today. The reason of the genocide happened in Cambodia, it's been a fairly long time, since 1970. because between 1970 to 75, Cambodian had a bit of disagreement and a bit of civil war fighting among each other with the help of American. And then some Khmer people, the peasant mostly, they joined the Viet Cong, joined the communist troops, and they become Khmer Rouge. They call Khmer Communists. So 1975, in April, they won the war, they liberated, they took over Cambodian, the city, Phnom Penh city, in the whole country. That's the reason. And also the reason they hated the capitalism. Anyone you can read or write or wear glasses or spectacles and everything, they execute them because they think they are bad people. They cannot change or wash their brain. So easy to keep the peasant one because easy to tell them and to lie to them, they will believe you. So that's the reason. And this been going on for 4 years. I had all the pain and all the experience during that time, including myself only 17. And very, very sad that I lost many members of my family. And at the time, I couldn't think of anything else, just try to survive.
So Sokville, they insisted on you city dwellers having to work in the agricultural fields. They considered that to be proper work, and all the things that people did in the cities were simply capitalist rubbish. And you're completely unsuited for that kind of lifestyle, weren't you?
Yes, because Cambodia never be a country who short of the food or rice. But how come when the Pol Pot came and in charge or to take over the Cambodian country, why the country became famine, with no food, not enough food to eat? And also, like myself, I born in the city. I never been in a rice paddy. I never been working outside in the farm, and it's very difficult for me to adapt to the situation at the time. And when they can see that, because I don't even know how to use the sickles, to cut the harvest the rice and things like that. You have to learn from it. I have to start to make myself like fit in with the farmer as a peasant, you see. And I have to lie to them that I can't read, I can't write, pretend that just someone that I never been at school or anything like that. So that's the reason. They just hate all the rich people. They call them capitalism or Americans,
Yes. And these soldiers, by the way, were uneducated teenagers, weren't they? So going around with AK-47s and
yes,
wearing black clothes and sporting watches, and they were complete and total brainwashed young people, weren't they?
I could see on their faces, some of them maybe 12 years old, they carry on the gun AK-47, which is supplied by Russian, and they carry that gun and across the floor, across the ground, because they're not tall enough to carry that gun on their shoulder. Also, I can see on their face, they so hated us. They've been told, they brainwashed them. And I could not believe at the time, like someone like lieutenant or general, and someone like high power in the military, in that, why they all back down and let all those people control them, intimidated by them, because something just change just happened, and everyone used to be powerful, and they just back down for them to treat them very badly. They can kick you, they can shoot you, you can't answer it. You have to accept it.
One of the big differences between your two experiences was the ages at which you experienced these terrible things that happened to you. As we heard, Janine, you were only 7 years old, whereas Sokval, you were a young adult, 17 years old at the time. And I just wonder whether the issue of age makes any difference to the way in which one experiences terrible personal events. Janine, do you think that there's a difference between being a 7-year-old and a 17-year-old?
Well, I have two people who survived in my family. My cousin, Nina, who was 4 years younger. She was 5 when the Gestapo, well, when the Nazis came, and my aunt, who was 17. And I was 7 when the Russians came, but the Russians didn't harm us. And I was 9 when the Nazis came. Well, among 3 of us, perhaps my cousin, who was then 5, perhaps for her it was, she couldn't understand what was going on. She is quite, even now, quite vulnerable. My aunt, on the other hand, she always tried to fight back. And I think for her, perhaps in a way, it was easier. For me, because I was, in a way, always managed to run away and improve my situation. While my cousin Nina stayed with a family and they were not always kind to her, but she only stayed in one place. Well, I always tried to improve my situation. So I moved from one place, and I had false papers. So I moved from place to place. I don't know if it makes any difference. I think after the war, people thought that having been a child, I will forget and I shouldn't speak about it and try to forget. But I don't think even the small children, they cannot forget what happened. And I certainly haven't forgotten. And I remember a lot of details. Whether it was more difficult for me or less difficult, I don't know. I think everybody suffers in a different way. And I don't think there is a sort of hierarchy in suffering, you know. For some people it's more difficult than for others.
Yes. One of the other striking differences between your 2 stories is the issue of family. Because as we heard in the introduction that I read, your father was shot. You didn't actually witness it, but it happened almost in front of you. Your grandmother was taken away. Your mother died a few months later at the age of 29. And so you have grown up without parents. You had your aunt, and you've just, she survived, but you never grew up with family. A little bit later in this extraordinary episode, which we may have time to come back to, your brother Tunja was shot. So you lost all the members of your immediate family. And you, Sokofo, although you lost immediate members of your family, your mother was the heroine throughout all of those years. And she was there for you in the most remarkable way, an extraordinarily courageous and brave woman who came with you even when you emigrated to the United Kingdom. Yeah. And yet, what is really strange is that you, Janine, who grew up without parents, went on to marry and to build a family with children and grandchildren. You, Sokofo, who knew what it meant to have family because of your mother and her presence in your life until 10 years ago, chose never to build your own family. So I wonder if that's just coincidence or whether there are deliberate decisions at work in your lives. For you, Janine, the need to build family, and for you, Sokol, for whatever reason, the decision not to build family, although you were briefly married for 2 years at a much younger age before you, and that was a forced marriage and wasn't a happy one, you separated, but you never went back and married again when you had the opportunity as an adult. Can you try and unpick this for us and understand, Janine and Sokol, what drove you to have a family, and you, Sokol, not to have a family? Sokol, let's hear from you first.
Well, the reason with me, I've been not forced, but arranged married by my mother when I was about 22, when we came back from Pol Pot and stayed in Phnom Penh. And unfortunately, I didn't have enough luck. You know, the person I married to, not very faithful to me, not in the way of she not faithful one, has seen somebody on scene, but just when we first got married, we were told that I only have my mother and one brother and one sister. So this family is what I got left. If anyone come to join me in my family, have to love my family too, you know, love my mother and respect all of us. But she changed her mind after that. About a year later, she completely, totally changed, and she doesn't want to be with us anymore. Even though when I escaped to a refugee camp because we couldn't bear to stay in Cambodia anymore. Because
but why, when you came to the United Kingdom and you got a job and you had a good job and your mother was with you, why then did you choose not to marry and have a family?
Because I couldn't get someone into my life without look after my mother, because she need place to live. And any woman that I met someone like in Holland and things like that, but all of them want to separate me from my mother. They said, I can't marry you because you still have your brother and sister live under the same roof. So they just want to split me up from my family, which is I don't agree. I didn't agree on that. And the reason why I say can't be bothered, and the time keep going. I've been working so hard. I have no time to do anything else. That's it. But I'm happy. I'm happy to be single and being alone. I'm not sad at all. And that's like give me more experience, because for myself alone, I sad enough, I suffer enough to take care of myself, to find the food, to earn some money, to do this, do that. To bring someone in your life, you have to look after them. To have more kids, you have to look after them. So the more life you bring into yourself, you become, they depend on you. If you don't look after them well, you become a horrible person. So that's why I decided, no, I've been in the monk for 2 years, Buddhist monk.
Yes,
because I understand now why Buddha changed to become, he was the king and he left everything and he become Buddha. So because that's a way of the true of life is getting born, growing up, getting old and ill and die. Only for noble truth. So the way I look at now, no one can escape it. And luckily, I don't have so much pain to bring someone into my life and, cry and lost again. I had enough of that. And since I've been in England, I never move anywhere because in Pol Pot, I move place to place, non-stop, every single month. Now I stay in England since 1987 at the same house, the same town, the same place. Because I had enough of that, yes.
Thank you, Sato. Thank you for that. But Janine, for you, it's been very different.
Well, I was from when I was 9, from then on, I was alone. For a year when we were hiding in that hole, I was with my aunt and my uncle, but then they stayed in Lvov. They were hiding for another year. And then I was in a way free because I managed to get false papers, but then I moved from place to place, from convent to convent, then priest, then eventually I found a job as a maid and I stayed with that family. But from 9 years onwards, I never had a family. And then after the war in 45, when my aunt came to fetch me, she put me in a children's home in Paris. We were in Paris then. And I was with other Jewish children and we went to school and they sort of tried to create an atmosphere of a family atmosphere. And also, as I told you, we never talked about the war to the point that I didn't know anything about what happened to my best friend, the French young woman who was my best friend. And we were just supposed to lead a life in an orphanage. And that's what happened.
So getting married and having a family was important for you?
Well, no, I never thought of getting married, to be honest. No, I eventually came to England but I was then 24. And I originally came for only a few months, but then I met an Englishman, my husband, and then I had my
love
children.
Followed.
Well, yes, but I've always been sort of worried that I didn't really know that I wasn't the right mother. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing because I didn't have a mother to teach me what to do. And luckily, my two sons are absolutely wonderful people. And I don't know if it's thanks to what. I think mainly that
I think it's probably because they have a wonderful mum.
Well, I
Probably
never
a
thought
wonderful
I
dad
was.
as well.
I always thought the opposite because I didn't have an example of what a mother should do and or not do.
Sure. I want to just focus on one other significant difference in your experiences. Janine, while you undoubtedly witnessed brutality and lived through these terrible years in fear of your life, fleeing from place to place, by contrast, you, Sokval, were brutally beaten and you were starved, you were stricken with malaria, you were physically abused. I wonder whether these differences have had an impact upon your attitudes in later life towards your tormentors. Because I know, Janine, you have preached a story constantly of tolerance. I have never heard you demand revenge. But I wonder, Sokval, when you talk about still having nightmares, whether you can, because of what you experienced physically, whether you can eradicate the bitterness of what happened to you.
Yeah, for myself, I never forgot the nightmare. It's always in my heart, in my head, and then I know what's to cope with that, because the reason being because when you get older, you tend to more understand and you cannot turn the clock back. Yes, I get very upset and disappointing that I could not face the Khmer Rouge leader who destroyed the whole country, and to ask them question, why they do that? Why did they do that and had to destroy my life, my future? How dare they do that? They got no right to do that to me, Cambodian, as a Cambodian person. Why I have the choice, I have a freedom to choose. So why they got inside the Cambodian, the whole country, and taking over and change from republic to communist, the communist rule. And all those communist rule learned from different countries, from China, from Russia. But how the communist Khmer Rouge got all the weapons, all the guns and everything supplied to them. There's all this is connected to the people outside Cambodia as well. And all the Khmer Rouge leaders, they're not educated in Cambodia, they're educated in France, in Paris. So all this political that you don't understand at the time. But when I was in the Pol Pot killing fields as a 17 years old, yes, I was traumatized, very upset. But one thing that hope made me want to leave is to see my mother. And also my father, they took him away for they say training. They never came back, along with my uncles and two of my cousins. And a lot of people disappeared through execution. And it's too many to cry, too many to count. And at the end, you just say, I had enough and no more tears now. I couldn't cry anymore. But even
I hear in your words, Sokval, I hear anger. You're still angry. You would want revenge?
I don't want to revenge, but I like to have justice. I want the international law, the world to see why people like myself, like my family, my father, my mother, all of those, die in the killing fields through the execution, through the rule of Khmer Rouge, never get any justice. And they have anything to say. That's why I'm doing this, just to wake up for every Cambodian people in Cambodia. Even though the country changed now to become everything like update with the catch up with the world, but no, they still have old-fashioned in their head, corruption and all this things, still horrible political there. I wouldn't like to say it, but that's why. And so many Cambodian people survive there. They don't mention it. They don't talk about it.
And Janine, I saw you nodding, while Sokval was speaking. You would like to have revenge, or do you feel the same anger, or do you have an entirely different attitude?
Well, there are, first of all, in a way, two statements. Revenge. No, I know that straight after the war, I must confess, I was very angry. I didn't want to kill them, but I wanted, for instance, the Polish family who betrayed me, who brought in an SS, and in fact, they killed my brother. And it's just that this SS didn't want to kill me for some reason. I didn't, I was so angry after the war that I was thinking I will go there with a toy gun just to frighten them and to ask them, why did they do it? Of course, I never did it. But I don't want really revenge. I agree with Sappho. I want justice, and they should have been judged, and they should have been tried, and if necessary, sent to prison. Now, the other thing for anger or forgiveness, well, I am asked quite often about it. Do I still have anger? Yes, I do. Not towards the young people, the young Germans, the young Poles, no, because they are not responsible for what happened, what their grandparents most likely did. But I am angry, yes, towards the Nazis, the SS, who killed innocent people, who killed young children, my brother. And I cannot forgive killing of innocent people, of killing my family. Most of my family was killed, uncles, aunts, cousins. My grandmother most likely was shot, because when they first came, they started shooting the Jews, and not so much deporting. It's just
I'm going to come back to that shortly.
So it's very important.
It's a very important point, and it's one that's very important for you.
Yes.
So it sounds as if Sokol and Janine, this need for justice is very strong in both of your lives, and that's the message that has come through from both of your responses to the question that I raised. Yeah. I'd like to turn to some specific episodes in each of your lives, and Janine, I'm going to like to start with you. We've heard that together with 12 other Jews, you were saved and hidden by a young man in an underground bunker beneath a convent in Lvov, where you stayed for a year, and you knew him only as Edek, which is a kind of popular nickname. And despite all of your attempts after the war, you were never able to discover who he was. And then in 2019, the wonderful Mark Cave, who of course is putting on tonight's event, at that time, a trustee of the National Holocaust Museum and now director, did some very intensive sleuth work, and he discovered that Edek was actually a 19-year-old member of the Polish underground called Franciszek Rozotki, I've got no idea how to pronounce his name, who died in 1974 at the age of 49. And apparently, according to a newspaper report that I read, when you found out his identity, you were visibly moved. And I wonder why it is so important for you to know the name of this person and what difference it has made to you by knowing who he was.
Well, obviously he saved my life. He took tremendous risks. We were 14 in that bunker. And, I stayed there for nearly a year, but the others continued for another year. He was in fact caught on 2 occasions and he managed to escape. But he is a hero and somebody who takes risks for what? Just because he considers us as human beings. And I really was so grateful to him. All my life, I wanted to thank him. Fortunately now, his name is in Yad Vashem, as you know about it, I suppose. So he has been celebrated by Israel. But of course, I didn't thank him because I left Lvov, and in the middle of the night, I escaped from this hole, and then I never went back to Lvov. And in fact, after the war, he went to Krakow, but of course I didn't know about it because I came to France with my aunt, and I haven't been able to thank him.
But has anything changed for you as a result of knowing who he was? Has there been any kind of, forgive me for using this word because it is probably entirely the wrong word, but did it bring any sense of closure for you?
Well, the closure is that I know that he was recognized by Israel as one of the heroic people. And, you know, so I am glad of that. I'm glad that to know his name, and Mark Cave, who is a great friend of mine. I was so thankful to him. He spent hours trying to find out, and everything was in Polish. He had to translate everything. So for me, in a way, it is a closure, yes. It just, I regret that I never thanked him, but at least he was recognized of what he did.
Yes, yes. Sokval, if it's not too painful, I'd like to take you back to two chilling episodes in your life. And I hope you'll forgive me if it is, and if you find it too painful, then we can move on. But the first one is you're being moved with your family and others from Phnom Penh, and you're going from village to village. It's very, very harsh circumstances. You're given very little food. The circumstances are absolutely brutal. You're living lying on the floor in little villages. You're being eaten by mosquitoes. You get no food. Your grandmother's traveling with you, and she's getting progressively weaker and weaker by the day. She's even suffered some form of stroke, so she can no longer walk, and you're carrying her day by day, and she just has a complete lack of food, and she is not doing well in the rigors of these brutal conditions. And you sleep next to her on the floor in this little hut door in the open one night, and you try to feed her, but she's just not taking any food, and you're lying next to her that night. And when you wake up in the morning, you touch her and you feel that she is cold, and you discover that she's died during the night. She's cremated in the Buddhist tradition. They dig a trench and they put some firewood in, and you sit there and you can't cry. There are no tears for you. A little while later, going forward by some time, when you're laboring in the killing fields and your mother and your brother and sister are in a village close by, you're able to visit them from time to time, but you receive a message that your brother Kosal is ill with malaria. And you visit them, and he and your sister are absolutely swollen with malnutrition, and they're racked with malaria. But you have to leave because you have to go back to your labor camp, because if you don't, you're going to be beaten. And as you leave, you hear your brother's crying voice, "Please, brother, don't leave us. Don't go. Please don't go. These evil people are taking my brother away from me. You will all burn in hell." But you have to leave.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, you receive a message that he has died.
Right.
How does one have the strength to lead a normal life after experiences such as these? In fact, one of our viewers put the question a bit more strongly. He asked, is it possible to forget the trauma in moments of joy?
Yeah, it's not that easy to forget. I never forget, but I'm not silent. The reason I'm doing this because I want to remind myself the trauma or the pain that I've seen and endure. And then you got to think it's the past, but the past It's a history, but that history never forget. And the reason, because when like my grandmother, I was really close to my grandmother, apart from my mother. She always looked after me. She always kept something for me after school. She always have some little cake or little thing for me. And when I saw her in the killing field, you know, in the bamboo, in the forest, in the jungle, laying flat on the piece of leaves, we just cut the leaf and make a place like little birds or animal living there. And I thought to myself, how sad. My grandmother, I never seen my family like this before. And that gave me stronger. I kept saying to myself, that never be like this forever. That someday somehow would change. Because what happened in Phnom Penh at that time, nobody believed it. Nobody couldn't believe, could guess that could happen like that. Everyone stood on the street on the 17th of April, waving and greeting the communist Khmer Rouge, you know, all they came in with the black pajamas, all the tank, everything. No one ever thought that we've been kicked out of our house to the jungle and working hard labor. And from place to place, I've been treated very badly. But you have to put your head down, hide your identity, just keep quiet and keep going until one day you might be lucky and to survive. So all these things that give me the energy and not to think too much about it, because I want to live, carry on to live, to see what happened next. And I might be lucky to go back to Cambodia, to Phnom Penh, to see my own house or school and go back to school again. But unfortunately, I'm too old to do it. So all the time you spend in the refugee camp, to place, everything, all my education, all forgotten. And you got to think, when I came to England, I couldn't speak English. I only speak French. And now the French became rusty now because I didn't practice that much. But what I want to be doctor. I want to learn because I know I'm quite capable to study education. But unfortunately, I have to work to find the money to put family together. And I'm really grateful that I support my mother till the end of her life, that's a duty of, as a Cambodian, we look after their parent. And no one ever abandoned their parent. If they do that, they are evil. They're not nice people.
So it's really a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit that Janine, with her experiences as a young girl, and your experiences that we've just described and others have been able to move on in your lives and lead normal lives and rebuild your lives. That's absolutely extraordinary because, you know, as an outsider, you know, when we live these privileged lives, we would just imagine that if you go through something like that, nothing can be normal afterwards. And yet you've created normality in both of your lives. I want to come back to you, Janine. I know that you have a very strong view that there are some aspects of Holocaust that have been underemphasized and that are deserving of greater acknowledgement. Would you like to tell us your thoughts about this?
There are two, as I mentioned, there are two aspects which I wish they should be more emphasized. First of all, most of the Jewish people who died, you know, the 6 million, they were shot. They used to shoot people for quite a long time before they sent them to concentration camps. And only a minority were sent to concentration camps. But because it was so hard for the German soldiers to kill children and old people, that they decided not to carry on shooting them. But that's when they arrived in our town, they were shooting people.
Like your father?
Like my father, my grandmother, Nina, my cousin's father, and her brother, they were shot. And most likely the other members of my family. And the other point, which I also wish we could speak about it, is the resistance. I know that the Warsaw resistance, it's very well documented and they deserve it because it was organized and they didn't want a lot of things, but they don't mention, it's not mentioned other towns. You know, Primo Levi, the great Italian surviving writer who survived the Auschwitz, he mentioned that even in Auschwitz, they were talking about resisting. In Lvov, in our ghetto, well, I wasn't there anymore, but towards the end, they started resisting and they didn't have any weapons. They were not helped. They were not helped by the Poles. They were not helped by the Ukrainians. It was just the opposite. But they decided to gather and to resist and to fight as well as they could. So I wish we could mention more often. In Lublin as well, another Polish town, where there was a resistance. In some Jewish people escape from one of the camps in the eastern Poland. I just cannot remember offhand the name of the camp. They rebelled, they killed the Nazis, and they ran out. And I wish it could be mentioned more often, the resistance.
Yes, and there has been this whole sort of story about sheep to the slaughter and that they were didn't resist. And you're really saying that actually there is an untold story of resistance that is other than Warsaw Ghetto. And thank you for mentioning that. Perhaps we'll hear more about that. Sokval, was there any attempt at resistance towards these young brutal soldiers in the Khmer Rouge?
Yes. At the moment, I believe some of the evil communist regime or communist soldier or group still alive and living well in Cambodia. And no one ever discovered their identity. They just hide their identity and still blend in with the people. And even those, the leader of the communists, most of them die now, but some of them still alive. And to say that you pinpoint, I mean, like myself, I seen when I was in the refugee camp, I met one of the Pol Pot soldier. But when you see him, you just think, yes, this man is a Pol Pot soldier. He might kill many people, but he didn't kill me. But then myself thought to myself, said, I'm not going to take revenge on him because he got family, he got children with him as well. And that person, I think, how can I take revenge and kill somebody back because they killed my family? I think I couldn't do it. Because I couldn't do that, even though I'm very angry or upset. I just want to find some justice to punish that person. Someone I can do that. But no, it's still ongoing in Cambodia. It's not really stable. This political involved and so many bribe and, you know, so many things happening there.
Let me ask you about your faith. After you were able to escape, you became a monk for a period of 2 years. Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you still remain a devout Buddhist. How important for you has faith been in allowing you to survive your ideals, recognizing that both you and Janine faced the very worst human behavior and lived at a time when there appeared to be a God who was not listening?
I nearly got executed a few times. But I believe in faith because I believe always pray to my grandmother after she passed away. I always pray to my father, they took him away, and everyone else, I keep praying. My faith is to believe that I have someone up there to look after me or protect me. And the one night, the Pol Pot soldier took me in the group from the village to have a meeting, and they got my name on the list. They called all the young teenagers between 14, 15, 16. One family lost her 2 sons because he went off and he's thinking he's going back to school. But actually it was execution, but he never came back. And that night I remembered they called me completely in the dark. We sit there, listen to they're telling the story about the regime, about how good they are. They rescue us from the capitalism and blah, 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 you know, the whole lot of that. And then they called the name. They said, now we're selecting a few one who got opportunity to go back to school to study. And they called my name out. say Sok Pao. And then one of the ladies, she was the head of the group, because when we go out in the jungle, they make it like 10 family as a group, and she's the head of the group, and she's the one know exactly where we came from. She knew everything about our background, and because she was working with my father, under my father, in army, and she wanted the wife of the army, the soldier. She told me, say, sit down, it's not your name Sok Pao Din. And I said, why? I want to go back to school. Why you stop me? She said, sit down, just sit down. You're not. And she told the Khmer, the communist Khmer soldier, say, no, he's not Sok Pao, he's Sok Pao Din. So his name not the one on that your list, so different. So that night I was lucky to escape that. Otherwise, I never see my mother again. I don't know why that night I really want to go back to Phnom Penh, to school, because I thought, oh, I might go back to Phnom Penh to see my house again, and I might be better to bring my family back to Phnom Penh. I didn't think that the way they trick her to say, yes, I want to go back to school, they just want to execute you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Janine, I know that that you have never lost your Jewishness, even though there have been sometimes a struggle with faith, but you know who you are, and you know where you wish to be buried, and you'll be buried with your people, and that is a very strong theme in your life.
Yes, I must say my family was religious. I remember going to the synagogue with my father somehow. I don't know why not with my mother. But, you know, in the ghetto, the conditions were so atrocious. We were just thinking, how do we hide? Where do we hide? Where do we get some food? How do we escape? It was, that is my brother and I, we didn't pray because we were always frightened. We were always looking for something to eat, somewhere to hide.
Yeah.
But as I told you, yes, as I tell people, I am Jewish. Of course I am. And I will remain so, and very proud to be Jewish.
Thank you. Well, we must come, of course, now, as we come to the end of our program, to the big question. You have both spent a significant period of your adult lives telling your stories in the hope that the world will listen and that these atrocities will never happen again. And for you, Sok Pao, it must be particularly distressing that Southeast Asia clearly did not learn the story and the dangers from the rise of Hitler that had happened 30 years previously. And that the tyrant Pol Pot was once again allowed to arise. And I wonder what hope each of you have for keeping alive the vivid memory of these events, and that whether that will effectively act as a deterrent in the future. And I should add that to all the best of my knowledge, there have been no attempts to deny the Cambodian atrocities. There is, of course, a flourishing and growing movement of Holocaust denial, which makes the issues of keeping our Jewish story alive that much more complex and difficult. So for all of your experiences and what you have seen of humanity and the evils of humanity, are you optimistic? Do you feel that your stories will be a deterrent? Is there a way in which we can keep these stories alive, and what real difference is it going to make? Why don't we start with Sok Pao, and then we will conclude with Janine.
Yes. For me, optimism maybe not, because this world these days is material world. Everyone thinking about money, profit. They cut the forest down. In Cambodia, they cut all the forest down, and everyone, should make money. $1 million became millionaire over the night, 24 hours. Even let alone my property still standing in Cambodia, it's in Phnom Penh. My properties many places. My mother have a lot of properties there, but I could not have it back. How sad is that? Because those people took over my property, they became millionaire because those property now $6, $7, $10 million. And how they do that? And myself still alive and know exactly what they're doing, and I couldn't do anything about it. That's a sad thing. And optimism, no, because I think as soon as the people the same, they might not, the people now in their mind, justice or be nice and kind seem to be hard to find. And most of the leader, they have to be find someone really trust and really believe in the face, like myself still alive, because I keep praying every night. But within the Pol Pot, the killing field, I pray to Buddha, I pray to that, and eventually became monk. It wasn't my choice. It's like a, you know, like a surprise. And I thought, well, to become monk, want to know what is Buddhism practice about. That's what I learned from it. Right. Yes, it is true. And I'm very pleased I was that. And I learned and became monk for 2 years.
Okay, but no optimism. Janine, can you give us a different perspective here?
Well, on the one hand, I'm very worried about the future. I'm worried for my children, my grandchildren, and I'm very concerned, very upset when I see the killing that is going on in various countries, the hunger of children like Yemen. And however, I feel that maybe as long as there are people like Edek, the world isn't completely bad, that we will do eventually, we will help each other to create a more peaceful, a better world.
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, ultimately, we may not be able to remove evil from the world, but every little bit of light helps to disperse the darkness, and your testimonies will stand for all time.
Thank you very much.
Let us hope that the world and its leaders take notice, and that ultimately, as is the theme of our Holocaust Memorial this evening, the truth will out. And thank you, our audience, for participating tonight, and Uptown Events for expertly hosting this webinar. Thank you so much, Janine and Sakal. Your stories are inspiring. Your courage is enormous. You have given us tremendous strength. It's been hugely interesting. It's been really something special to be able to have the two of you and to hear your stories. And to our audience, can I just remind you that you can log on to the next part of our Holocaust Memorial program at 7:30 this evening in half an hour, when we'll be lighting candles and putting your questions to a distinguished panel. And the log-on details for 7:30 are exactly the same as the log-on details and the way in which you came into our session this evening, whether it was on Zoom or via US TV. But thank you so much all for joining us. And Janine and Sakal, may we wish you good fortune and happiness in your lives, and a healing for all of the pain that you've suffered. And thank you so much for sharing your stories together with us.
Thank you. You're welcome. I'm very pleased I have opportunity to talk about it. But I hope my experience could give some people some idea in how to create a better world. Plus, for the young generation, for your grandchildren, your family, for the people, not think too much, to be greedy too much. We like to live in a simple life and love and care. Especially respect your own parents. That's what I want to say. I always respect my parents.
And they should read your book as well. Janine, last word from you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, good night to you all, and thank you so much for joining.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Good evening, and welcome back to Southampton Synagogue for the continuation of our Holocaust Memorial Day 2022 program. After a really moving and insightful conversation earlier with Rabbi Shlomo, Janine, and Sokfel, it's time for our candle lighting memorial ceremony, which will be followed by an intriguing question time panel. Several hundred people are participating via the US TV and Zoom, as well as a limited audience here in the room. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you to our partners, the National Holocaust Center and Museum, Caroline Marcus Associates, the United Synagogue, and the Jewish Chronicle. The theme of Holocaust Memorial Day this year is One Day, a theme that has so much relevance in Jewish belief and our prayer services. Throughout the ages, whenever the Jewish people have been stuck, our nation has hung on tight to tikva, the hope that one day things will be different. We talk so much about not just living in the present, but also building for the future. And so in a sense, the fuel that drives us today is the hope of one day. This worldview is shared by others, and tonight in our synagogue, we feel united with people from all faiths and none in the commemoration, conversation, and determination required to make one day a reality.
A heroine of the Holocaust, whose life and legacy encapsulates the hope in one day, is Hannah Senesh. Born in Hungary in 1921, when she graduated secondary school, Hannah emigrated to Israel with other young people determined to return to their ancestral homeland and work the land. But in 1943, she volunteered to parachute into Nazi-occupied Europe in an attempt to help the many Jews who had not been lucky enough to escape. She was captured, tortured, and executed in Hungary in 1944. She was only 23 years old. Yet her message was one of hope, one of freedom, one that spoke about a tomorrow to look forward to. 2 years before she died, she wrote the beautiful poem, Walking to Caesarea. The main refrain is, Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'hayam, rishrush shel hamayim, barak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam. My God, I pray that these things never end, the sand and the sea, the rustle of the waters, lightning of the heavens, the prayer of human beings. After Hannah's death, her poem was put to rousing music, which Levi will now sing.
Thank you for that beautiful rendition. Music brings light, and light brings hope. Tonight, we light candles, 6 for the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust, and the 7th candle for victims of other genocides. Yet these candles are not only a commemoration, they are the legacy of those who came before us, lighting up the way to the future of one day. The first candle will be lit by Councillor Sabrina Francis, Mayor of Camden. The next candle will be lit by Councillor Georgia Gould, leader of Camden Council. Candle number 3, Councillor Oliver Cooper, leader of the opposition of Camden Council. This event has been kindly dedicated by Paul Sonnabend and Katie Ostro in memory of their father, Charles Sonnabend, a Holocaust survivor who cherished his time at Southampton Synagogue. Charles was a character with a massive heart and message for the world. He's deeply missed, but his presence is always felt in our community. The 4th candle will be lit by Paul Sonnabend. Thank you. Canon Dr. Giles Fraser, representing other faiths. Thank you. Rachel Emuna Levine.
I am lighting this candle in memory of the 1 million children who perished in the Holocaust. Yehi Zichron Baruch. May their memories be for a blessing.
And the candle for victims of other genocides, which we also think about on Holocaust Memorial Day. Julie Siddiqui, MBE.
The prophet Ezekiel described the Jewish people at their darkest hour as being like dry bones. As they despaired, they said, Avda tikvatenu, our hope is lost, and God promised them that they would regenerate. This has become the mantra of the Jewish people, and one we share as a global community on Holocaust Memorial Day. Od lo avda tikvatenu, our hope is never lost. These candles represent our commitment to never forget the past and to face forward, to never lose hope in the future. Hope in peace is so strong that it forms our greatest prayer, Oseh Shalom. Rabbi Lord Sachs of blessed memory said, optimism is the belief that things are going to get better. Hope is the belief that we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue. Hope is an active one. It takes no courage to be an optimist, but it does need courage to hope. This evening is an evening of courage for all humanity, an evening of hope, an evening where we dream of peace one day. To close the memorial ceremony, Levi will sing the Rabbi Sachs version of Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו, והכל ישראל, והכל ישראל, ויאמרו, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו, והכל ישראל, והכל ישראל, ויאמרו, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום, שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו, והכל ישראל, והכל ישראל, ויאמרו, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום, שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו, והכל ישראל, והכל ישראל, ויאמרו, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום, שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו, והכל ישראל, והכל ישראל, ויאמרו, ויאמרו, ויאמרו אמן.
Amen. Thank you to all those who lit candles. Thanks for the singing, and to everyone who has contributed kindly their donations to create light tonight. Mark Cave is a long-standing member of our shul and a dear friend. He is also director of the National Holocaust Center and Museum, the only place of Holocaust learning in the world founded by Christians. He spent 30 years as a strategist and entrepreneur in advertising. I remember those times well, Mark. And as a producer of documentaries and short films. His work has won over 200 awards, including for the Holocaust short films Edek and Stand Up. May I ask, just before I hand over to Mark, anyone on Zoom who will be posing questions to the panel this evening, please make sure that your proper names are showing on Zoom so that we can spotlight you at the relevant time. Mark Cave and our panel, over to you.
Thank you, Ellie. Is this thing on? Can you hear me? Yes, good. That was a wonderful thing from all the Levine family. Hope peace one day indeed. But we can, I think, help ourselves a little bit towards getting there and being active in that. So, if you will, a slight change of tone. If you take the high road, Ellie, then this is some way the grittier lower road, because there are things that have persisted for 2,000 years which still trouble society today. So here we are on an occasion to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, the Holocaust being possibly the world's greatest atrocity that the world has ever seen, the root cause of which is the world's biggest conspiracy theory. And I want to talk a little bit about that before we take questions from you on the floor and people watching on Zoom, just to give you some context and some pictures to show you to get you into the zone, I suppose, because there is some quite challenging stuff. The reason I take great pride in running the National Holocaust Museum is, as Ellie says, because it is the not Jewish one. Because the incredible Smith family wanted to build bridges. They wanted to take responsibility for what has happened in history and how it might affect our lives today, all of us. So it's a kind of safe space for difficult conversations, and I hope that that's what this will be tonight. There are some quite chewy questions, and it is all meant to be respectful and in a tone of just mutual cohesion, because that's what we are hopeful of. So, just to give you some kind of some cues for what this is all about, I said that this conspiracy theory exists right up until the present day. Actually, right here at Southampton Synagogue, 2 years ago, should be some pictures coming up on the screen, was an example of one of them. This was in December 2019, where somebody had come up with a bright idea of writing on our walls here, and actually all over Belsize Park, the conspiracy theory that the Jews were behind 9/11. If you could go on to the next pictures, and again. In the clean-up, I have to say, and I think these pictures, by the way, were taken by Oliver Cooper in the room tonight, lighting a candle. I felt slightly sickened, not only because of what had happened, but because it was like watching Kristallnacht the morning after as well. The resemblances are horrible. Even more recently, I mean, literally we're talking about in the past couple of weeks, we've seen somebody who was doing a wonderful job at Grenfell Tower as a support and social worker. It transpires that she came out and blamed the whole thing on Jews, and the whole Grenfell appalling fire was a Jewish ritual sacrifice. So we'll be asking tonight, where do people get these perceptions? Where do these conspiracy theories come from? And what can we do to overcome them? And tragically, as we know, this time last week, the news was unfolding about things going on in Texas. Again, there were beliefs and assumptions in the attacker's heart about Jews, including, by the way, the fact that he thought the way to get the person he wanted to get released from jail was if he took the rabbi in Texas hostage. That rabbi could call the rabbi in New York, and that rabbi in New York could call the US government and get the person freed. So again, that's another trope about Jewish control, which many of us may feel is crazy and absurd, but lots and lots of people think about Jews in this way. So this is what tonight we'll be talking about. So, what can we do so that one day the truth, the real truth, will prevail? So with me tonight are 5 experts, 3 of whom I might say aren't Jewish. They might be much better placed than the Jews amongst us to give us some insight. So I need to first of all apologise that Lord John Mann isn't able to be with us. He had come down with a nasty case of COVID and couldn't even join online, but we wish him a speedy recovery. He does incredible things as the government's chief advisor on anti-Semitism in the worlds of football, on university campuses, and John, if you are listening by some remote chance, wish you a very speedy recovery so that you can keep on fighting the good fight. Tracy Ann Oberman, welcome. Tracy, as many of you will know, TV, theatre and radio actress and narrator, widely known for roles including Chrissy Watts in EastEnders, Auntie Val in Friday Night Dinner, and most recently, of course, Nancy Malinowski in Ridley Road. And by the way, she'll soon be playing a really rather different kind of Sherlock and a rather different kind of production of
Sherlock.
What did I say?
Sherlock.
Say more.
Although it's a similar
you're so
kind of
picky.
Shylock.
In The Merchant of Verona.
Venezia.
Now, the interesting thing is, of course, that Tracy Ann campaigns against anti-Jewish racism, very bravely, I might say, handling an avalanche of absolutely vile abuse on her Twitter feed that it provokes. And as a result, I think you like to call yourself something of an accidental activist. And you certainly do a marvellous job. Canon Dr. Giles Fraser, over on my left here. Giles is a priest in the Church of England. He was Canon Chancellor of St Paul's Cathedral. He taught philosophy at Wadham College, Oxford. He was a columnist for The Guardian and is a regular broadcaster on Radio 4's Moral Maze and Thought for the Day. And he's also the author of a profound tome which I heartily recommend called Chosen, Lost and Found Between Christianity and Judaism. Julie Siddiqui, MBE, named in the Times 100 most influential Muslim women in Britain, Julie has served as Executive Director of the Islamic Society of Britain. She's a co-founder of Nisa Nashim, along with Denise Joseph, who I think is in the audience somewhere, and others, and is also a trustee of a Jewish-Muslim theatre company, Muju. She recently set up social enterprise Together We Thrive, and was awarded an MBE in 2020 for her services to promoting interfaith understanding. James Rosenthal, over on the end there. James has held various roles at Google since 2007. He is currently Director for Cloud Strategic Initiatives across Europe. Previously, he was an IP lawyer and tech entrepreneur. He sits as an advisor to Witso, Jewish Interactive, and mentors startups at Google Campus. He also campaigns against anti-Jewish racism inside Google, which we look forward to hearing about. Professor Maiken Umbach, on my left. Maiken is Professor of Modern History at the University of Nottingham and an academic consultant to us at the National Holocaust Centre and Museum, with whom she's co-created the virtual reality-based exhibition, which we launched here a couple of years ago before the pandemic, The Eye as Witness, which tours again as of now.
Indeed.
She previously taught at Cambridge and Manchester, with visiting appointments at Harvard and other institutions globally. Her research project, Photography as Political Practice in National Socialism, was selected as Anti-Racism Project of the Year by UK Research and Innovation. So, in true Fiona Brose style, I'm going to say we're going to go straight to the questions, because we've got lots of them to get through. And I thought it would be appropriate to start with some people who had direct experience of the Holocaust. So there are two people that I'd welcome to ask some questions, which I think will probably be for Giles, actually. The first is Jeanette Lesser. I don't know if she's in the room or whether it's online.
Online.
It's online. Okay. Jeanette, would you like to... Hi.
Right.
Please ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. First of all, may I thank all concerned for organising this event leading up to Holocaust Memorial Day, and as we've just commemorated the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference for the final solution of the Jews, I think this is a very appropriate time to start airing some of the questions. I would like to introduce myself. I am a daughter of Belgian World War II refugees fleeing from Nazi terror in the 1940 Dunkirk evacuation. My childhood was spent in cosmopolitan Belsize Park, and I encountered my first experience of anti-Semitism at the age of about 7 or 8 years, when one of my then closest friends said, "My mother says that I, my friend, must not play with you anymore because you are Jewish and you killed Jesus." My question is, what steps are being made by the educational authorities and the various church authorities to reintroduce some aspects of religious studies, particularly the history of biblical times, to finally dispel for once and for all the distortion of the true facts, which have contributed significantly to the anti-Semitism that has infected society throughout the generations and is today worldwide rising to frightening heights?
Thank you, Jeanette. Giles, I think this is a question for you, but before you do, is Tom Keeve in the audience?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Tom, I'd like to welcome you to ask your question as well, because it's quite similar in tone. If Jeanette was talking about basically the crucifixion trope, I think you want to ask a question which is different but similar.
That's right, thank you. It's about the blood libel.
Yeah.
Which is one of the oldest and most persistent of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
Do you want to explain what that is?
The blood libel is the accusation that Jews kill Christian children, or at least a Christian child each Passover, in order to use their blood to make matzahs. Although this is quite a ridiculous issue, and is totally against all Jewish teaching. It has also been formally condemned by popes and Ottoman sultans and countless others as untrue, yet it persists into the 21st century. The motivation of those spreading the lies have been religious, racist, and most recently political. So my question is, what action does the panel propose to ensure the demise of this myth?
That's a nice, easy one, Giles, for you to start with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anti-Semitism, as we know, has a wicked capacity for reinvention. And the reason I say that is because if I say in the churches that I've experienced, I've been in, I haven't heard a blood libel expressed. That's not to say that I don't think there's anti-Semitism. It just reinvents itself in different forms. So the blood libel is invented in East Anglia in the 12th century. You know, it's this country's global contribution to anti-Semitism and a wicked piece of stupidity. Where anti-Semitism exists in the mainstream churches, I don't think it looks like that these days. I think it exists, but it doesn't look like that. I think that the blood libel does exist in quite vigorously in other parts of the world, but I think that the blood libel stuff is less prominent in this country. I think the stuff about the crucifixion and about Jews being Christ killers is much more about, but again, I would say that this wasn't the prominent anti-Semitic trope that exists within churches. I think that there's been a lot of work in the 20th century through the Roman Catholic Church, work of popes and theologians, to recover a completely different context for the Gospels and a much more Jewish context for the Gospels. And that work's really important, Gaza Vermeij and people like that. I personally think the most dangerous and difficult areas of anti-Semitism these days are around the way in which Christians talk about Israel. And I think that's a much more pernicious cover for anti-Semitism because it gives Christians a sense of their own righteousness in talking about Jews in a particular sort of way. So I think the way in which Christians talk about Israel is the really most difficult area. Blood libel, I'm sure it goes on in some fringe places, but I haven't experienced it. I have experienced anti-Semitism. Can I just say one tiny more thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. My wife is Israeli. My boys are Jewish and Israeli. And we have experienced, I'm not Jewish, but my father was Jewish, so I have Jewish father, Jewish wife, Jewish children. So I'm very sensitive to how this works. We had about 4 or 5 years ago, outside the church that I'm the priest, had lots of anti-Semitic stickers, which were put there actually by Millwall football thugs, and they were pretty disgusting stuff. And I think we were targeted because my family's a Jewish family. And what I would say, even though there has been important work done in the churches, is that I don't think when I raised this was taken seriously enough. I think some people think this is an issue that's just gone away, that doesn't exist in our society, and they're wrong about that. And the police didn't treat it with any great seriousness. And I later got an email from an anonymous email from a local Christian who said, "I know who put them up. They're a good person, really. Please don't judge them."
So I think, oh gosh, that's loud. I think what you was my experience on the ground of having been a part of so much anti-Semitism activism, and also the sort of concept of tropes coming back at me, is that the blood libel trope and the killing of Christ, also like anti-Semitism, metastasizes
Yes.
and changes, so that these days the tropes that are thrown back, which are still stem from that same idea that Jews are other, that they are not to be trusted, that there's a wickedness, that there's some sort of deceit. I've been told repeatedly that Jews poison Palestinian wells, that we are ethnically cleansing Palestinians, that I myself am a Palestinian baby killer. And what I noticed was that when you went behind the profiles of some of the most ardent and fanatical Palestinian activists, there were a couple that we actually got to find out who they were, and they were far-right activists, a guy called Scott Nelson, who was actually pushing a blood libel trope, absolutely going right back to the beginning. And I think that the problem with Palestinian activism is that it often attracts and fig leaves some really nasty anti-Semitism, that if you just pull back the covers of the new tropes and the new vernacular, goes right to the heart of that blood libel idea.
And COVID cooperating with that as well.
All of the whole
So there was
thing.
We'll come on
Yes,
to COVID.
I mean,
Come on
it's-
to COVID in a minute. But the really important point, I think, should be emphasised, is blood libel is used, yes, in the context of Israel, and the point, I think, for me anyway, is that the characteristic attributed to Jews is now attributed to a nation state. So you do see all over the Middle East a vampire with fangs,
Yeah.
tearing into Palestinian flesh. It is the same trope. So
And also being told that you take Palestinian babies, there are experiments
It's the
on
same
Palestinian
thing.
babies.
It's the same thing.
That's where Palestinian activism,
Yeah.
unfortunately, turns into a really nasty, ancient form of anti-Semitism.
Indeed.
And that's what has to be stamped
Indeed.
out as well.
have a question,
Correct.
another quick question for Giles from Mark Gordon. Mark, what's your question?
Thank you. Continuing on a similar theme, actually, given the background that you just talked about, what examples did you come across of anti-Semitism, of Jewish tropes when you were growing up? And given your background, how did you deal with that as you were growing up in essentially a sort of Christian upbringing as a child and then going into the church later on? And I think actually the question is worth asking of the other panellists as well. Not only what examples did you have, and Tracy just talked about a couple of them, but also how do you deal with them, or how do we deal with them when we come across them? Thank you.
I find it more difficult now than I did when I was growing up. It's more alert. I'm more alive to it, and since I was married about 8 or so years ago, and my wife, as I say, who's Israeli and Jewish, and sometimes, like she did this morning actually, sometimes out of solidarity with me, we live next door to the church, we live in the vicarage, so she comes to church, and so sit there, she bakes the cake for everybody and that sort of thing. And then sometimes I'll open the Gospels and read the Portia for the, for the day, and I'm saying blah, 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 about the Jews, and the stuff in the Gospel about the Jews, and the way in which this is they're presented, I find it incredibly difficult. At Easter time, when there's a bit where the disciples are in the upper room, quote, for fear of the Jews. Now, there's a massive, great big bit of scholarship about how that word should actually be translated in the first century. I think it's terribly important scholarship. But whether it should be Judeans or Jews or... but anyway, I say that and I look at my wife and my 5-year-old and my 2-year-old and I'm going for fear of the Jews. And I think to myself, what are we actually doing in churches that's what's written in our scriptures? Now that's really difficult to... you just can't say that's not in the scriptures anymore. Let's pretend it's not there.
You don't have to read it.
What?
You don't have to read it.
Well,
out.
I actually do. I actually do have to read it out. I mean, I could decide not to, But actually, it is a part. So the scriptures are presented are prescribed for particular services. So, and I think the best thing to do is actually tackle it head on rather than. And there are times when I've cut something short because I'm not going to read it, but I'm not allowed to. But I think there's a real job of work in terms of scholarship to start looking at how we present that sort of stuff, because it's really I find it excruciating.
Maybe you should, in the same way as universities are sort of expunging books and titles and putting trigger warnings before certain topics and sentences, maybe you should, maybe in the church as a thought, do a trigger warning or give it a contextualisation.
Yeah, I'm not big on trigger warnings.
Well, you should be part of the university. I mean, you know, they're taking books off our university shelves.
Not big
Surely
on any
they
of
can
that.
do it with the
I'm not big
Bible.
on any of that. No. I mean, there's a very big question.
Put it as
Good try, Tracy.
Contextualise it, maybe.
Yeah, the contextualise it is exactly what you have to do. So you're absolutely. So I would not read that out and then not say afterwards, I have to tell you I found that very difficult and this is the problem and this is why it's a problem. So you're absolutely right. I would always contextualise it if that happened. And I also think that translations of what people in the first century would have heard by that is very different to what we would have heard by that. Not least because many of the people who wrote it were themselves Jews. So that was written by Jews for Jews, and in the first century...
Christianity having been a sect of
Christianity
Judaism.
wasn't in... Jesus never heard the word Christian, by the way. That was like, he'd never heard the word. Jesus, let's just get this clear. Jesus wasn't a Christian. Let's just make it that clear. Jesus wasn't a Christian. He was Jewish, okay? So many of these arguments are intra-Jewish arguments that you have in the New Testament. The problem is that the sort of vehemence you might have as a family argument looks very different the other side of a family split.
Sure. But then, as Tracy Ann is saying, maybe it could be recontextualized if the content itself can't be changed. I'd like, if there's time, I want to move on. I want to move on to other things, but maybe if there's time later, we could talk about Nostra Aetate and God's Unfading Word, which Lambeth Palace issued 2 years ago, which is, crudely speaking, a big apology for some of this stuff. And what are we going to do about it? And I'd be surprised if anyone in the audience has heard of it. Any hands go up? God's Unfailing Word, published 2019.
God's unphony word.
Unfailing Word.
Oh, unfailing
Nostra Aetate is people.
That's quite well. That was in 1964, I think, or something.
Yes.
So anyway, if we get time, we'll come back to it. But let's move on. We have another challenging question from Richard Bolkover, but I think it's online. Richard, can you hear us?
Hi there. Good evening, and thank you very much, Mark. In her recent important book called People Love Dead Jews, Reports from a Haunted Present, Dara Horn shows how Holocaust memorialization itself, things like Holocaust Memorial Day, have been used as vehicles themselves to marginalize, de-Judaize and relativize the Holocaust, to make it into a vague, glib, general mush about man's inhumanity to man, to make it just another racism, when in fact it was unique and sui generis in its aim to annihilate every single Jew in the world. So much so-called Holocaust memorialization provides ultimately misleading stories of redemption, understanding, and forgiveness. But most Jews were not fortunate enough to be survivors or refugees. They were killed, and in their millions. It also ignores the fact that it was no historical aberration. It was not just about the Nazis. Rather, as has been mentioned, it was a continuation of an anti-Semitism that long predated it in all of Christian Europe and in Muslim lands, and which is still very much alive today, and much of it is directed, as has been mentioned, against the Jewish state of Israel. I believe things like Holocaust Memorial Day and Holocaust memorialization generally therefore serves no purpose unless it focuses also on the Jewish living, not just the Jewish dead, including focusing on the Jewish Renaissance in Israel. Do you agree?
Well, yes. Is that enough? There's a huge amount there, Richard. I think that the bit that maybe we should focus on is the thing about Holocaust memorialisation being perhaps a little bit lowest common denominator and the Holocaust being de-Judaised. For me, that's the interesting part of the question. Maiken Umbach, how about you, giving your views on that?
I like the book a lot. It's very provocative, and some bits of it make for uncomfortable reading, but I do think it's powerful. One of the things that really struck me is Darahon makes a comparison between Holocaust testimony recorded in English, in American English, and testimony recorded in Jewish, and the differences between it. And if I can summarize it and slightly simplify it, the point she's making is that the English language testimony panders to an American audience. Every testimony is about love as the kind of central idea, and I guess it's what you mean when you say it's mush. Whereas the Yiddish testimony has incomprehension, anger, bafflement, vengeance, all kinds of emotion, very little love in that. And given that about 80% of the people who were murdered in Auschwitz spoke Yiddish as their first language, I think that should give us pause for thought. That said, I disagree that Holocaust commemoration is in itself the problem. I think my answer would be we need to make more of an effort to link it explicitly to the present. It becomes a problem if it is only commemoration. The commemoration, to my mind, needs to be a starting point of a journey of self-discovery and self-interrogation of us as a society. We've already mentioned some of the tropes that still circulate, are revamped by social media in particular. Anti-Semitism, the Nazis are very good at casting these in neat propaganda formulas and images really crucially, that you see these things on Twitter, the European Football League as a Jewish conspiracy, and the image that accompanies it is from Der Stürmer. It doesn't say it, but it is, right? So the imagery is still with us and is constantly being recycled. But it's the tip of an iceberg in a much longer and ongoing history, and I think one that is very much still alive and kicking today. One thing I would add to what was already being said about this recycling, not all anti-Semitic conspiracy theories explicitly name the Jews as culprits, right? You find these images, they have a life of their own. They become, there's a secret cabal of people, they're global, they're unpatriotic, they're these global networks, they're all connected to finance, and they're all operating in the shade, and nobody knows who they are. And sometimes they're labeled as extraterrestrials, right, who obviously control Google, or as lizards, or all these things. But really, it's the language of anti-Semitism, which is dressed up in different guises.
So you can be anti-Jewish without even realizing it.
Yeah, it's the structure of conspiracy theories. And some research that colleagues of mine and I a little bit have done shows that at this point, about 50% of the UK population believe in at least one conspiracy theory. That's the scale of the problem that we're actually dealing with.
So if you believe in extraterrestrials, why does that make you an anti-Semite?
Because they're almost interchangeable metaphors. You see it also in people suddenly becoming Jewish who aren't, right? Bill Gates has to be Jewish. Oh, because he's another of these guys who operates in the shade and controls everything.
Well, this is a reference to injecting. If you're an anti-vaxxer, you don't want because you worried that Bill Gates is going to inject
that is one of the many variations
of
it, right? So then he suddenly appears as Jewish, even though he isn't. There you see how it's not just about targeting Jews by name, but using Jewishness as a metaphor for everything that is wrong in the world in a sort of populist backlash against elites, against intelligence, against expertise.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on. I'd like to go now, if I may, because I'm conscious I'd love to hear from Julie and James. So this is a question for Julie from Tally Crickler on Zoom. Tally, can you hear us? We can see you.
Yes.
Yet to hear you. We can.
Tally Bednar.
There you are. Hi, Tally.
Hi, and thanks a lot so far. It's great. really fascinating conversation, so thank you. So, Julie, you co-founded Nissan Nashim to bring Jewish and Muslim women together. Among other things, the website said, we believe in the ability of women to build cohesion and positive change. Assuming you agree it is too simplistic to infer it is always men who are always the baddies, how can women include men in the process of positive change?
Julie, it's all about men being baddies.
No, I think, look, thank you. It's a great question, and thank you so much for having me here. I think that we've never said, you know, I always say that I love working with men as long as they're the right kind of men. But I think we felt that when we were talking about it, and actually it started by conversations within both Muslim and Jewish communities about gender, about lack of, you know, women in leadership, for example, how you know, places of worship play out, what the roles are of women there. And it, you know, there were a lot more similarities than I think people often realise, and some of the conversations started from that. And then it was very much about, look, something has to be done differently, because whatever people are trying to do isn't working in terms of Jewish and Muslim, you know, cooperation and working together and challenging some of the stuff together. So there was very much that. And also I think women, generally speaking, not always of course, can be more relational, and it becomes much more social and more connectivity through friendship. And we actually put friendship right at the heart of what we were doing, and still that happens now. And very much saying to people, you know, develop the friendships and develop the trust between each other so that you can then go on to do great things in society together, but also, importantly, talk about the difficult stuff. Because once you have a trust and a friendship with somebody, you can pretty much talk about anything with them. And I think one of the things that I'm picking up from here already is, you know, I totally agree that there needs to be much more conversation about what do we do now. Of course, the remembering and very much bringing those stories and those people's memories to us all the time is very important. But I think there's something, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done still between people. The very basic stuff about bringing people together. How many people in here never sit with Muslims and talk to them, and vice versa? How many Muslims, you know, have never spoken to the kind of people that we have here, or all of you, about any of these issues, and just put them out online or between each other? And, you know, those conversations and that trust that comes when you meet people and develop those friendships is crucial. And that's really what we put right at the heart of what Nissan Nashim was doing. So it's certainly not anti-men by any stretch of the imagination. And actually I've had a few people, including again recently, men, saying to me, you know, should we, could we, you know, do we? And I said, look, go off and do whatever you want. You know, whatever people can do for me is better than we've got at the moment, which is not really good enough.
But is there an assumption, Julie, in setting the organisation up? And Denise is welcome to say her 2 pence worth of this as well, that if you want to overcome some of these misperceptions that we've been talking about this evening, some of the tropes and the conspiracies and the hatreds, that you're best to start with women because they're more open-minded? Is that what it's about?
I mean, potentially. I would say that when I get backlash from people about the work that I do, whether it be working with the Jewish community or whether it be other things that I do, it's often Muslim men that will attack me first. So I think that what we do is not say that it's only among women. It's definitely the messaging and I think the symbolism of it is important. The fact that we do this work, and you know, even through the difficult times, as we saw last summer, you know, this kind of work becomes even more important than it was before. So I think there's definitely something about putting those messages out and showing people what's possible. And, you know, dare I say it, I think sometimes there are less egos in the room. There's less kind of politics, let's say.
How very dare.
Unbelievable. Right, Julie Siddiqui, thank you very much.
I also
also, don't you think that education and winning these battles often starts at home?
Yes,
it starts at the breakfast table. It starts at so I think women have often been at the forefront of these things, but are not seen at being at the forefront. I think it's great that so much of this dialogue can and should be female-led.
Yeah,
that's often where the root of it is.
Yeah, and I think there are issues around leadership and who's in charge and all of that in both our communities, and who speaks for us and all of that. And I think that women taking charge and very much being leaders, that's how I see all of the women that work in Nisan Hashim, very much proud of that. That it's not easy. It's not easy with people who are, I particularly think some of the Muslim women in Nisan Hashim doing this work when they're very much rooted in their communities as well, and speaking and doing it and showing that they're doing it and talking about it online, is brave. And I think I really salute them for that. And I think the more of us that can do it can only be a good thing.
Joe, I want to bring James in a minute. Sure. But Julie, we were talking beforehand.
Yes.
And in the context of everything that's been going on.
Yes.
I know did you
Please,
want to
if you don't
speak
mind.
A bit
So
about...
I know we're not doing a speech, but I wanted to just say a few words about what happened in Texas, and so I've written it down so that I don't kind of waffle. So please bear with me, just a couple of minutes, but I'll just say what I wanted to say. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, I begin in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Assalamu alaikum, I greet you with a greeting of peace. So it's the first time in a synagogue for me since the hostage incident in the US, so I want to make a mention here to the courageous and inspirational leadership shown by Rabbi Charlie, to him and his family, to his congregants, to the Jewish community there, here, and around the world. Know that we stand with you. To find out that the gunman was a Muslim from the UK adds to this for us. Of course it does. I've heard from many of my Jewish friends at how scared they feel, how this has affected them, added to the fear they have when their children go to school, raised questions about security, created doubts and suspicions, and this is very painful to hear. Of course, one man identifying as Muslim cannot represent every Muslim, but we as Muslims cannot shy away either when the issues are there and they become even more apparent at times like these. The gunman spoke about his warped idea, as we've already heard, that Jews run the world, that by getting to a synagogue he could get to the chief rabbi in America, and that the prisoner he was supposedly supporting would be released. I don't need to tell you that Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, as we're talking about today, are a very real part of all of our lives. And social media has given even more of a platform to keyboard warriors who make flippant comments in seconds that can cause untold harm and repeated trauma to many. Just a few days ago, an imam friend of mine posted a photo of himself with a Holocaust survivor. Under the photo were some kind comments, but also one that said, and please excuse me for the way I'm going to say this, but I wanted to say it as it was. So the comment basically said, I hope Holocaust will befall on them again. #Free Palestine. I messaged my friend straight away, and he hadn't seen it. He uses a number of platforms and can't always keep up with all of the comments. And he was thinking of messaging the guy and dealing with it one-to-one with that. He looked at his profile and realized this guy was in Kashmir, and we both agreed it would be pointless for him to now spend time one-to-one with one person in that way. But of course, these judgment calls are very difficult to know what to do with something like that. He did, of course, delete the comment anyway. And I've seen many similar comments to that, particularly last year during the heightened conflict and the attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque last summer. People were angry, tensions were high, friendships here between people, even those that I mentioned earlier in Nisan Hashim, were very much strained. Social media and WhatsApp threads were alight with divisive and unhelpful messages. And I saw comments and received direct messages from Muslim friends of mine that I felt were offensive, that spread more hurt and increased stereotypes, created more division. But here's the thing. The people I'm talking about are not evil racists plotting and planning on the dark web. These are friends of mine, good, decent people who I know truly care and have compassion for others, but who express their concerns and feelings of injustice in ways that may be unhelpful and certainly are offensive to others. What we see are people mixing up the Holocaust with political and other issues in current-day Israel and elsewhere, making comments online or in person, and not necessarily appreciating the impact or the danger that can create. When a man travels from here to the US, buys a gun, and takes a rabbi and his congregants hostage for 11 hours, it's not a time for us in any Muslim communities to be complacent or to make excuses. Nor should I feel the need to apologize for the actions of one man. Rather, it should be a time, and that's why I think we're here for today, to be thinking what more needs to be done, what can we do differently, what needs to happen next, how can we work harder together as Jews and Muslims and as people of other faiths too, to educate, to change the status quo, to challenge hatred when we see it, to call it out, and to not allow the tropes and stereotypes to go unchecked. I'm almost done. My trip to Auschwitz and other camps was, of course, truly impactful. As my husband and I stood in one of the rooms there, our fantastic teacher and guide Richard encouraged our group to quietly, in silence, stand and look at the wall of photos. Portraits of people who had been killed. Tears rolled down our cheeks, and my husband and I were mostly drawn to a photo of two young men who looked like our sons. And these stories are powerful, of course. Thanks. Keeping the humanity of those who died at the forefront of what we do is key. Helping people to walk in the shoes of others, and here in the UK we need to introduce people to each other more, to talk, to learn, to connect, to develop friendship, and to trust that only comes with time and effort, and most importantly, be prepared to listen. When the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre happened in Pittsburgh in 2018, I cried. I cried because I have been in synagogues like that. I know what would have been taking place in those moments before it happened, and I have friends like you here. I knew what they would be going through on that Shabbat morning. So I look forward to today's discussion and for us all redoubling our efforts to do more, to create environments where people are prepared to listen, to learn, and to really walk in other people's shoes. Thank you for your kindness, and thank you particularly to Mark for allowing me to do this little speech today.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. I think you just all seen someone who's a real sentient human being. So it's a lot of guts for you to come, and even more for you to say what you just said. So thank you. You're incredibly welcome, and
thank you.
It won't be the first time, I hope. I'll have you back many times. I'm allowed to come to your mosque in Slough.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, on we go. James sitting there getting hypothermia out on the wing. So I've time for a question for poor old James. So I'm going to skip some of the order, chaps. That's a cue. And we're going to go, please, to Laurie Wiseman, who has a question about, this is just a completely different slant of the debate now, about the role of social media in propagating conspiracy theories. So Laurie, if you're there, what's your question, please?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Mark. Good evening, everyone. An amazing and very provocative and very moving evening. Thank you very much. We've alluded to social media somewhat in the proliferation of hate speech and misinformation. And yet these powerful companies remain predominantly unregulated. So this is a question to James. I wonder what Google can do in its various platforms in reality to combat misinformation and hatred.
Thanks, Lawrence. Can you this one? Yeah. There we are. Thank you. Thank you, Laurie, for the question. It's a really good question. What can Google do? What can the other social media and tech platforms do? And I think, particularly, hearing what we've heard thus far, it's clear we must do more. I think the old sort of statement of, with great power comes great responsibility is ever, and even more true now than ever. On our side at Google, we do everything we can to minimize the propagation of misinformation, taking videos down, taking comments down. I was just reading today, I think in the last 3 months we've taken 5 million videos down, 7 million channels, 1 billion comments have been removed. But I don't think it's enough. It's clearly not enough because this stuff's still going out. And I was thinking about it all weekend in advance of this talk. And I think one thing becomes clear, and it goes back to what your brief, Mark, in terms of education. There needs to be more proactive education. Like, I was looking for good Holocaust education on YouTube today, and it was difficult to find. Now, that's partly, I suppose you could argue, it's partly due to the indexing and, you know, how things show up, but I just don't think there's enough good stuff out there. And actually, I mean, I don't want to throw you under a bus, but like when I asked you about your YouTube channel for the Holocaust Museum, there was very little on YouTube. So if I were looking around, I wouldn't be able to see the incredible content you've made. Lots of it's on Vimeo, which is great, but I think we all have an obligation to make sure that content is out there countering the misinformation. It's not enough to get upset, to shrug our shoulders, to wring our hands and say, oh, this is terrible, how's it happening? We've got to regulate. Yes, we do have to regulate. Yes, the laws in every country have to be followed in terms of Holocaust denial, any kind of incitement to violence, etc., etc. But we need to, I think, come out fighting with messages, including all the testimonies that, you know, that we see that are out there saying, look, this is what actually happened. It has to, every time one of those videos goes up, rather than saying, just take it down, which we must do, let's take it down and put something up that sets the facts straight.
So regulate and also educate.
Agreed.
Okay. So then there's still a suspicion, may I say, that even if you put great content on YouTube or wherever, that the algorithm set by the masters of the metaverse will make sure that unless you pay them squillions...
We're not the metaverse. I can't take responsibility for
Well, I meant it with a lowercase.
Okay. I know.
That unless you pay your squillions in advertising, that your great content will be bottom of the table. Could you just talk a bit about how algorithms work in regard to this? In simple,
you got the wrong guy.
Terms. Because not everyone's a techie.
No, of course. The way that, algorithms is just a fancy name for just the programming and the data calculations that take place in milliseconds to try and deliver the best possible content or the best, whatever it might be that you're looking for in response to a question or a search query. Like all of us put a query in, and we expect to get the most relevant result immediately. I think to your point, Mark, you're saying like often content that we might find distasteful ranks more highly, or particularly if it's false. And I think that is partly a regulation point. It's partly us making sure that all of these big tech companies are well regulated, to that specific. But also making sure that there is good counter information on there, and that it gets lots of views. And it's not a question, I don't think, of throwing loads of money at it, because I don't think, as you mentioned, like these keyboard warriors, around the world who are pushing like Nazi tropes, they don't have a lot of money behind them necessarily. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I don't think that's the key. I think it is about making sure that there's a volume of good content that's pushing messages of education and positivity. Not falling into the dead Jews trope either. But in terms of putting a positive, a factual narrative across that will make a difference. So I don't think there is no dark arts at play. I think that's what the illusion was. I think it's just a matter of making sure that all of the efforts that are going in to put negative messages across are counterbalanced and redoubled on our side by pushing the truth.
Tracy.
Could I just ask a very quick follow-up? Sorry.
Anything.
Isn't it the case, though, that the algorithm pushes content that gets a lot of attention? So the really controversial and outrageous story in a social media feed will be pushed up. The accurate news story will not be, because actually all the people who we're teaching to stand up and speak out are falling into that trap, that they are inadvertently giving exposure to the evil stories that they're protesting against, because the algorithm makes no distinction between positive and negative attention. It simply looks at attention, and then that gets lifted up.
Well, sorry, Tracy, do you want to go?
Well, no, again,
I'll be very
time.
quick.
Yeah,
I think that any content that is, blatantly untrue, misleading, leading to inciting violence and what have you, will be taken down.
Sure.
The other stuff that is opinion-driven, let's just say, I don't know, stuff off Fox News, let's say, that we might find kind of on the edge or more so, will be there, as well as other content, I guess, that's pushing the other side of the story. We will feed you, in terms of your likes, the stuff that you're watching, more things that are sort of in that direction. But I don't say that I can't speak for Google entirely, but that we're pushing things that are blatantly there to stimulate like outrage that you watch more and more and more.
Do you think it'll ever get to the point where the social media companies, who often look like they're financed by clickbait for hate, that I noticed when I was trying to get Wiley, the rapper who was posting days and days of anti-Semitic videos all over his Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and it got to the point where I managed to get hold of the CEOs and saying, be honest that on Instagram, if a picture of a breastfeeding woman is considered to be offensive and that image is taken down, but you've allowed a man to stand there for 4 days making non-stop 24/7 rants against Jews, and that is not considered to be breaching your guidelines, then social media has to be honest and say we are driven financially by creating as much hate as possible, and that's sometimes what it seems. And therefore, if you can take off Donald Trump from social media because that is not the truth. I still don't understand why Holocaust denial and all the other tropes are allowed to stand. I don't understand. And therefore, if education is the key to all of it, will these companies eventually put money into financing their own content so people can't turn around and go, oh, I'm not trusting that. That comes from the Holocaust Education Trust. They're right wing, they're left wing. Because nobody believes anything anymore. But if Google or Twitter or Instagram is putting out that message themselves and financing it and helping bring together a dialogue, do you think that will ever happen?
Two questions. I think if Wiley's videos were up on YouTube, they would be flagged and taken down immediately. And if they weren't, that's a problem on our side. But I think they should be.
Eventually they did, but it took a lot of a big, massive
But I think that we have to, that's our responsibility entirely. I think in terms of funding, I can say that for Holocaust Memorial Day, there will be a YouTube homepage takeover with content that is classed as being, constructive, fact-based content that will be on there. And I think that's something we should continue to do. We are also funding initiatives where more and more of that content is being made, not just about Holocaust Memorial Day, but any number of things that are education worthy, let's say. But we need to do more.
Maybe Google could do bringing communities together and
I think that's awesome.
It out.
Certainly internally, we make a big play of our Interbelief network, and I think that's something we're very proud of.
To be continued, but I'm going to move it on now. I'm conscious of time. You talked about education, so I'd like to have a question from somebody about education. There's a good one, I think, here from Matt Holton online. Matt? Or maybe not Matt. I could ask his question for him because I know what it is.
Ask his question,
Shall
go
I?
on.
Yeah.
Oh, he's there, he's there.
No, I don't want to do that to him.
Oh, no, he's gone.
Oh, you tease, Matt.
Oh, he's there.
There he is.
Go.
Yep.
Matt, the floor is yours.
Oh, hello. Sorry. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask my question. Already a lot's been discussed on education, but so many schools do teach World War II, but yet many schools omit the Holocaust or they skirt around it for various reasons. Perhaps some teachers feel challenged or sensitive. What do you think could and should be done to overcome this?
So just to give people some context here, Holocaust education is statutory on the school curriculum, but it was reduced in 2013, and the amount of hours that are given over to it are really insufficient for students to engage with it in any material way. But even worse, what Matt's question is saying is, in those few precious hours, do teachers actually meaningfully engage with the topic? Maiken, your views?
Yeah, so the problem is at the moment it's compulsory at Key Stage 3, and that's only in the national curriculum, not in the academies, although most of them follow the same guidelines. The reason is that is before you can drop history as a subject to make sure we get to everyone. It's a strong reason because from as early as GCSE you don't have to do history anymore, so if you move it later in the curriculum, then you're only capturing those who are still doing history, or sometimes, where RE or English or whatever might have a connection to the Holocaust through a particular topic. The other challenge that you mentioned is the reluctance of teachers to engage with it, and the fact that we're seeing a very, very traditional, and some might say outdated method of teaching the Holocaust compared to what else is happening in the curriculum. We've worked with teachers and we found that a lot of it is very kind of top-down because teachers are so afraid of the topic and of letting the debate spiral out of control that they simply tell, here are the facts, here's what you need to know, now repeat. And that is not engaging for students. Everywhere else we've seen this inquiry-based learning, you know, it's led by the students, it's their questions that they bring to it, and we've not properly done that in Holocaust education. So some of it is about strengthening it as part of the teacher training. And this is not just about the Holocaust. I think it's strengthening the whole area of having difficult conversations, that topic that Mark mentioned at the beginning. That's really what school and indeed university education, I might say, should be about. Right? So simply conveying the facts isn't enough. So empowering teachers, equipping them, also through CPDs and so on, to guide students through these difficult conversations without wanting to control every word that is uttered, I think is the key. If we keep just kind of telling people what to think, we're going to get a backlash. It's never going to work.
Michael, are teachers potentially, though, part of the problem? I'll give you an example. After the Hamas conflict last year, at JFS School, Jewish Free School, largest Jewish school in this country, in fact maybe in Europe, every single teacher at that school, Jewish, walked out of their union because of the abuse they got from their fellow teachers online. That, to me, says something.
Yeah.
So do we think that there is teacher training itself which is required here?
There's teacher training, there's training of governors as well, because it's often not the individual teachers who make those decisions. But I'm sad to say, I think that problem continues into the world of universities as well. We've seen some really nasty instances of anti-Semitism on campuses. This, by the way, is not new, right? We this mantra, education is the antidote to everything. The Wannsee conference was mentioned earlier, worth remembering that half the people there, about half of them had law degrees, half of them had PhDs. So simply education on its own doesn't inoculate you against anti-Semitism or other forms of racism.
I don't know. My daughter's, I've got a young teenage daughter. She, and absolutely rightly, everyone of her generation can tell you everything about the civil rights movement in America. She knows so much about the civil rights and the black movement, everything, and it's brilliant. But there is a severe lacking in teaching the roots of anti-Semitism in Europe and in this country, and the Holocaust, of which all ties in together, to be taught in the same way. It's often one class, it's pretty cursory, and there's just not, it's not given the same weight and importance as I think it should, and even she pointed that out.
So
I think
is that because people need to be brave to talk about
because
it?
it needs to be.
Yes.
This is partly
But
an
why
issue
is it brave? Why is that
because
bravery?
there is potential disagreements that people are really anxious about here in a way that they may not be in other places.
What is the disagreement around the Holocaust, teaching anti-Semitism?
Well, no, because you may raise all sorts of questions. Children might say, this is... they might say things that they feel are not allowed to say, or that they aren't, that are wrong, and so forth. And so the teachers clam up and get terribly.
But Tracy's point is about fact. If it's fact.
Why should that be a potential hotspot? But you're able to learn. My daughter, honestly, her history and knowledge of the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King of Alabama is unbelievable. That was put in from year 3 onwards. The Holocaust,
but it's
anti-Semitism,
a risk-free conversation.
But why
it's
is anti-Semitism a risk?
More risky.
Why is it more risky?
Well, it is more risky. So, for instance, we've had some very brave statement earlier, incredibly brave statement that you made earlier. Now that requires huge courage, and I salute you for it. But those are the sorts of things that are required when we're talking about anti-Semitism. Now I think that I think part of the problem is that teachers, and we have to address this somehow, are actually much more afraid of talking about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism than they are of talking about the civil rights movement.
My daughter said that the way that it was taught was literally it was the Jews this and the Jews that and then the Jews this and then the Jews that. That's wrong. You need to have faces. You need to personalize it. You need to take it. it needs to bed in much earlier as a problem of othering, like all other forms of racism. And it goes back to do Jews count? Anti-Semitism as a form of racism, in the same way as all other racism has been really bedded in our education system, has to go in. And that comes down to our history of Jews in this country, our our flirtations with fascism, our flirtations with otherism, our crucifixions of Jews at cathedrals around the country. These pieces of history, the March of Mosley, all these things, my daughter doesn't know and her generation, and in fact many people, don't know a single thing about, and that is a lacking in our education system.
It's not seen, I would say, it's not seen as a racism. And the word itself, anti-Semitism, obfuscates.
Exactly.
People don't know what it means in a person in the street. Anyway, again, conscious of
Sorry,
time.
but I feel really strongly about it. So,
but I don't think we disagree. I don't think we disagree.
No, but I do it, and it really bothers me that it's marginalised, it's seen as less important, and it's seen as punching up.
That's completely right. But I think we need to address ourselves. There's no disagreement with me there at all. We have to address why that's the question.
Because we know why.
No, I don't think we do know why. I think it's a much more complicated mixture of factors about why teachers who will be deeply anti-racist are not on this issue, okay? Now, there's a whole load of factors that need to be addressed, and I think we need to really address them.
Well, I think it's a really unpopular, but hey, we're being controversial tonight. We have and I'm sorry to say it, we have a Labour Party that saw itself as incredibly pious and anti-racist, that had a core of anti-Semitism that went through it, like a Brighton rock. And that is the problem, is that, when we have our unions, I speak for Equity, the Actors Union, when it is prepared to go on a march with its anti-racism credentials, standing next to people who held up things with crucifixions of Jesus Christ, saying, don't let them do it again, on a Gaza demonstration, when you have pictures of horrible tropes of Jews with their big Jewish hands in the globe, and that's considered to be a pro-Palestinian left-wing march that unions should get behind, that's where we have a problem.
Massive problem.
And that is where we have to educate people that to be anti-racist, to see yourself as left-wing and caring and heartful, you have to incorporate anti-Jewish sentiment and education against that as part of it. It's not
whether education does it is another question.
But it has to be education.
Well, let's come on. That's the question I want to maybe close this segment on.
Actually, there was just a...
I've got to be a little bit brutal because I'm conscious of time. There's a question from David Joseph, who is in the audience, about this, which I think he frames rather well. So, David, please ask.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, look, we've heard a lot about the subject matter of anti-Semitism in its varied forms. We've heard about modes of delivery online and so on and so forth. What are we going to do, okay? Because there seems to be a bit of a consensus amongst you that it's education. But I mean, we've been dealing with this now for 2,000 years. It's not as though we've just woken up to the idea that suddenly let's just educate people. So what specific action would you take? And is education enough? And if you think education's enough, well, why have we failed so badly?
I'd like Maiken to answer on the education point, and then if there's time, we'll bring in the other members of the panel about non-education aspects. Maiken.
Mm-hmm. So we make this assumption that everybody is looking for the truth. This is not true. People look for the truth when that has a direct utility for them, right? I'm not going to jump off a high building because I decide that maybe gravity doesn't exist. But deciding that a Jewish conspiracy exists and everything that went wrong in my life and every lack of success and everything that I'm a bit frustrated about is the fault of the Jews or some other unnamed cabal of Illuminati, believing that has no immediate negative effects for me as a person. But it has lots of positive effects, right? It makes me feel really cool. I've seen through the conspiracy. I'm cleverer than the other people. I find a group of like-minded people online who tell me how clever I am. So there are lots of kind of side benefits, right? And I think we need to be honest about that people for perfectly selfish reasons find it useful to believe this stuff. The question is, how do you wean them off that, right? It serves a purpose. Simply telling them the fact, every study shows, simply factually correcting does not wean people off the conspiracy theory belief. What sometimes does is by uncovering where this comes from and uncovering the linkages to the outright Nazi Semitism. There's only a very small group of people especially in this country, who actually want to identify as Nazi. So if you show them that what comes across as this, nice, sometimes quite left-wing, in solidarity with this anti-apartheid, anti-colonial, whatever, actually is informed by the imagery that Goebbels was promoting, that Himmler was promoting, that was all over the Stürmer and so on, how closely related this still is to hardcore Nazi ideology. I think that helps to this. It's really about empowering people through education. I think not just telling them facts, empowering them to see these connections that will then motivate them to say, oh, no, actually that I don't want to be part of.
That's rather good. I think.
You say 2,000 years of education. I suppose it's what do you call education? I think I don't think we have. I think we have been. But hey, I'm saying it all tonight. I think we've been very complacent as a community in this country. I don't think we've reached out enough. I don't think we've reached out to stand up for ourselves enough in a vocal area. I don't think we've reached out to make across the board for community. We're inward looking. We look after ourselves, and I think it's time that we have to speak out, go out, reach out, make community connections, and fight for the fact that, with David Baddiel's book recently and so much of what I've been doing and others, we count. We have a right to be here, and we have a right, when we turn around and say that is anti-Semitic, not to be told, oh, but what you mean by that is you don't want to pay more taxes, or what you mean by that is it's not right. They wouldn't do it to any other minority, and they shouldn't do it to us, and we have to reach out and help others, and they have to help us as well.
I want one more question, because I want to end on this question. I think we all pride ourselves at South Hampstead and the museum on being open-minded, and it's great to be able to have a bit of a tussle. That was the whole point of it, within a safe space, I hope. So there's one more question which reverses the tables slightly, and I'd like to kind of just end on that, because I think it demonstrates what certainly the Levine family here are all about, the rabbinic family. So the last question I'd like to come from Rebetsin Lindy. I don't think she's in the room, I think she's online. And it's a question for Julie, and it's a rather good one. Lindy.
Thank you. Julie, thank you for your words and thank you for your views. But I just want to sharpen that a little bit more by asking to what extent you have come across misinformed anti-Muslim or indeed anti-Christian beliefs, perceptions, opinions amongst the Jewish community? And if so, what form have these taken? And which, in your mind, are the most important to change?
Yeah, thank you.
Did everyone hear that? What are the...
Yeah, I think thank you for asking, and I think that the most important thing I would say is that when you don't meet other people, you create a fear and a stereotype, which sounds obvious, but I don't think enough has been done, as we've heard already. Both ways, if we talk about Muslims and Jews in particular, it's just so important, so important to meet, to eat, to talk, to listen. And I can just tell from the kinds of things that I hear my people in the Jewish community say, and also people in the Muslim communities, I can tell that they just haven't spoken to each other. Right. And for someone who does do the talking and the listening and the eating, and obviously there's always more that we can all do.
Eating is good.
I can hear that hasn't happened enough. It's so obvious to me. And so I would say to all of you and to others from Muslim communities and others that we have to do that stuff more. But guess what? It doesn't happen by itself. You have to put the hours in, the times in, you have to make the effort. And I really do believe that is one of the main missing things that we can still do a lot more with. Maybe I'm, have the audacity of hope, as Obama would say. But I do, because I think there is still so much more we can do. It feels like 2,000 years and we're still here, but actually I think there is more we can do. And when I saw that, the stuff happening last summer and the vitriol coming out and the fear and the people dividing even further, it's heartbreaking for me Because I just think we have to do much more. And as we heard earlier, there is still more we can do online. It's not just about taking down, it's the putting stuff up, which I think is a really important point to hear from someone in that space. So there is just still so much more we can all do. We all have to ask ourselves. You all have to ask yourself. I will as well. You know, as I said, when I came back from Poland, or when I saw what happened last year in the summer, and the ripping apart of people again, and people trying to stir up hatred, I just reconfirmed to myself that I have to do more, and it's a very personal thing. And we all have to make the effort. So, you know, reach out, go out of your comfort zone, you know, speak to someone, but that's, I think, you can't argue with that stuff. It just does work. And, you know, there's so much more of that I think we need to do.
Well, you certainly put in the hard miles and the many hours, and I hope we'll do some more hours together with you. Julie, James, Tracy, Maiken, Giles, thank you very, very much for your time. You've been very generous.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, panelists. And thank you to those who posed questions, those questions that were answered, and also those that unfortunately there wasn't time for on this occasion. But hopefully we'll have you back, or you can give out your email addresses and they'll reach you that way. We appreciate them all. That was truly a packed hour with material for us to ponder over for many more hours. So thank you, each of you individually and together as a wonderful team. We will be continuing the discussion in a slightly different way over the next week, as Camden schools are invited to participate in a free, expert-led virtual program which includes 3 options now displayed on the screen. The first is a webinar exploring one day the theme of Holocaust Memorial Day in 2022. The second is a webinar to hear a Holocaust survivor share their experience. And the third is an educator-led interactive workshop exploring one day, which includes a virtual visit to this synagogue with me to experience Judaism as a living faith. We are not just talking about things in yesteryear. We're here today, and there's a story to share and want to interact with through discussion that we have with other people of other faiths and none. One day is achieved, I think that came out very clearly, through both education and action. When it comes to action, community cohesion is key, which is why it's so important that the South Hampstead Synagogue collection for the Castlehaven Food Bank in Camden is ongoing weekly, and you can drop off items here at the shul every Tuesday. Now, to close the evening, I'm shortly going to introduce a lovely finale, but just before that, a big thanks to everyone who has worked behind the scenes to make this happen. We mentioned our partners earlier, but they're also the unsung heroes, our talented South Hampstead team of members and staff. Here's one behind the camera and a whole bunch of people everywhere. There's one sitting very quietly over there who does so much for the community, and lots and lots of people who get behind this place to make it tick, so thank you. The Uptown Events team and Atomic Sound. You've almost been sleeping here to get this going overnight, and you've really linked us in person and online. One day, hopefully, we'll all be together. So, the finale. Matisyahu, the reggae artist, had a hit song, One Day, which will be performed by Benji Miller, one of our very dear young members of the synagogue community and the grandson of Holocaust survivors. Benji, take it away.
Sometimes I lay under the moon, my God, I'm breathing. Then I pray, don't take me soon, 'cause I'm here for a reason. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it will turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars and our children will play. One day, one day, one day. one day. It's not about win or lose, 'cause all we lose is a freedom. The souls of the innocent, blood-drenched pavement keep on moving, though the waters stay raging. And in this maze we can lose our way, our way. Might drive you crazy, but don't let it fool you, no way, no way. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it'll all turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars and our children will play. One day, one day, one day, one day, one day, one day. One day this all will change, treat people the same, stop with the violence, down with the hate. One day we'll be free and proud to be under the same sun, sing songs of freedom like why oh, why oh, why oh, why oh. All my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars and our children will play. One day, 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 one day. One day, one day, one day, one day, one day, one day.
So there you go. We can use rap and reggae for prayer. One day. Indeed. Thank you, Benji. Thank you, everyone. Keep on singing. For those here, please be conscious of our neighbours on the way out by being quiet and giving them a peaceful Sunday evening. And to everyone, both here and online, thank you. Good night.